After the love of his life passed away, Dave Martinez, a sharp-minded retired construction attorney, decided to leave the chaos of the city behind. He bought a quiet home in Willowbrook Estates, a gated community with manicured lawns, a sparkling pool, and the promise of peaceful retirement. All he wanted was solitude, a place to heal, and the occasional visit from his nephew Miguel, a bright college kid who brought laughter back into Dave's days. But peace didn't last long. One sweltering summer afternoon, Miguel and a few friends headed to the community pool to cool off. That's when Karen Mitchell appeared. Karen was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, vice president of the HOA, and a woman who thrived on rules, complaints, and control. She marched up to the pool in her oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand, and demanded the boys leave immediately. According to her, guests were limited to 2 visits per month, a rule she claimed was strictly enforced to protect residents. Miguel politely explained they were family guests, but Karen wasn't interested in explanations. She snapped photos of the boys, threatened fines, and warned that any further violations would have consequences. Dave arrived just in time to hear the tail end of the confrontation. Calmly, he asked to see the exact rule she was citing. Karen smirked and said he'd receive official notice soon enough. Days later, a letter arrived scheduling a compliance hearing with less than a week's notice. Dave knew immediately something was off. As a former lawyer who had spent decades reviewing contracts and bylaws, short notice like that was a red flag. He pulled out the community charter and governing documents. Sure enough, the guest policy Karen quoted didn't match what was written. Her version was far stricter, and the hearing notice violated state law on proper notification periods. Dave showed up to the meeting prepared. He laid out the discrepancies politely but firmly. The board shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's face turned red as she insisted the rules had always been that way. But when Dave asked for proof of when the stricter policy was voted on, she had nothing. No minutes, no record, nothing. The board still sided with her and upheld the pool ban for Miguel and his friends. Dave walked out knowing this wasn't about guests or the pool anymore. It was personal. Karen had decided he was a threat the moment he questioned her authority. From that day forward, the harassment began. Anonymous complaints about his lawn being half an inch too long. Notices about trash cans left out 10 minutes past the allowed time. Warnings about vehicles parked facing the wrong direction. It was relentless, petty, and clearly targeted. Dave stayed calm and started keeping records. Every letter, every email, every interaction. He sensed there was more to Karen than just an overzealous HOA enforcer. One evening, Maria Santos, the quiet HOA treasurer who rarely spoke at meetings, knocked on his door. She looked nervous, clutching a folder. Over coffee, she confessed she'd been worried for months. Numbers in the budget didn't add up. Large payments to contractors for work that seemed incomplete or overpriced. Maria had tried raising concerns gently, but Karen shut her down every time. She asked Dave if he'd be willing to look at the financials privately. He agreed without hesitation. What started as a favor turned into late nights poring over spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements. Patterns emerged quickly. Certain vendors received massive payments for pool renovations and landscaping upgrades, yet the work looked suspiciously basic. One company in particular kept popping up, a contractor linked to Karen through old property records. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. When Miguel graduated from college, Dave hosted a small backyard celebration with family and a few close friends. Nothing loud, nothing late. Karen called city code enforcement anyway, claiming illegal gatherings and unpermitted structures. Inspectors showed up unannounced. Dave welcomed them in, showed them the modest setup, and handed over photos proving everything was within guidelines. The inspectors left after 20 minutes, finding 0 violations. But Miguel, savvy with social media, had quietly live-streamed the entire exchange from his phone. The clip of Karen lurking across the street, watching the inspectors like a hawk, went viral in the neighborhood group chat. Residents started whispering. For the first time, people saw Karen not as the protector of property values, but as someone willing to weaponize authority over a graduation party. The failed inspection became a turning point. More residents approached Dave privately with their own stories of intimidation and selective enforcement. Maria brought additional documents, copies of altered bids and emails hinting at kickbacks. Dave connected the dots. The overpriced contracts weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. Hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for community improvements had been siphoned off through inflated invoices, with a portion quietly returned to those who approved them. And at the center of it all was Karen, who had ties to the developer from years earlier and stood to gain the most. Dave knew he had enough for a civil challenge, but this smelled criminal. He needed allies who could act without fear of retaliation. Quietly, he reached out to Jim Walsh, the HOA president who had stayed neutral until now. Jim admitted he'd suspected something was wrong but lacked proof. With Maria and Jim on board, the three formed a careful plan. They gathered evidence methodically, backing everything up off-site. Dave installed discreet security cameras around his property after noticing small acts of vandalism, tires slashed, mail tampered with. Sure enough, the cameras caught Karen on his driveway late one night, key in hand. The footage was unmistakable, but Dave held on to it. He wanted the bigger case to land first. As word spread within the board, Karen grew desperate. She launched a smear campaign, spreading rumors that Dave was unstable, harassing her, even dangerous. Then she crossed the final line. One morning, police knocked on Dave's door responding to a report of threats and property damage allegedly made by him against Karen. Dave invited the officers in, remained polite, and asked for details. When they described the supposed threats, he pulled out his phone and played a recent recording of Karen bragging to another resident about teaching him a lesson. The officers exchanged glances. They left with a warning, not for Dave, but for Karen about the consequences of filing false reports. The pressure was building, and Karen was unraveling. Local news picked up the story after the viral graduation party clip and anonymous tips about financial questions. A detective specializing in white-collar crime reached out to Dave directly. Evidence packets were prepared. The community, once divided, began to unite behind the truth. Everyone waited for the upcoming annual meeting, where elections and budgets would be discussed. Karen planned to use the stage to portray herself as the victim of a bitter newcomer. Dave planned something entirely different. He had months of documentation, witnesses, recordings, and financial proof ready to present. The quiet retiree who only wanted peace was about to deliver the fight of his life, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The annual Willowbrook Estates community meeting was packed. Residents filled every seat, with others standing along the walls. Tension hung thick in the air. For months, whispers about missing funds, selective enforcement, and outright intimidation had spread through barbecues and text threads. Tonight, the budget vote and board elections were on the agenda, but everyone knew the real drama would come from elsewhere. Karen Mitchell took the podium early, dressed sharply, voice trembling with practiced emotion. She spoke of dedication, sacrifice, and the personal attacks she'd endured from certain disruptive individuals. She painted herself as the lone defender of property values against chaos. Many in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own encounters with her wrath. When the floor opened for resident comments, Dave Martinez stood calmly and approached the microphone. He thanked the board for their service, then asked permission to share a brief presentation regarding community governance and financial transparency. Jim Walsh, the president, nodded immediately. A projector screen lowered. Dave began not with anger, but with facts. Slide after slide appeared. Original contractor bids next to final payments showing massive markups. Emails suggesting bid rigging. Bank transfers to shell companies linked to Karen's past real estate partners. Photos of incomplete work despite full payment. The room grew quieter with each image. Karen interrupted repeatedly, claiming the documents were fabricated, demanding Dave be silenced for defamation. But Jim kept order, reminding everyone that residents had a right to speak. Maria Santos took the mic next, voice steady despite visible nerves. As treasurer, she confirmed she had personally copied the records and provided them voluntarily to investigators. She displayed ledger discrepancies totaling over $700,000 missing from amenity funds meant for the pool, clubhouse upgrades, and landscaping. Gasps rippled through the audience. Dave continued, showing the security footage of Karen damaging property and the audio of her admitting to filing false reports. He presented the police incident report warning her against further misuse of emergency services. Then came the letters from the district attorney's office acknowledging receipt of evidence and opening a formal investigation into fraud and potential mail fraud charges. Finally, he revealed signed statements from multiple residents detailing years of targeted harassment. Once they questioned spending or rules, Karen's face drained of color. She tried one last defense, claiming it was all a conspiracy driven by personal grudges. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Residents began speaking up, one after another sharing their own stories of intimidation, arbitrary fines, and fear of speaking out. A retired teacher described being threatened over holiday decorations. A young family recounted being cited repeatedly for children's toys in their own driveway. Each voice added weight to the evidence on screen. By the time Dave concluded, the mood had shifted completely. He didn't ask for applause or cheers. He simply requested the board suspend Karen from all duties pending investigation and call for an independent forensic audit of the finances. The motion was made, seconded, and passed nearly unanimously. Karen stormed out mid-vote, shouting about lawsuits and betrayal. But the doors closed behind her, and for the first time in years, the room felt lighter. In the weeks that followed, the investigation moved quickly. Detectives interviewed contractors, subpoenaed bank records, and traced the money trail. Several vendors flipped early, providing emails and texts confirming kickbacks. Karen's attempts to intimidate witnesses only added obstruction charges. The community rallied in ways no one expected. Volunteers organized cleanups, neighbors checked on elderly residents Karen had targeted, and a new slate of board members ran on promises of transparency. Miguel and his friends were welcomed back to the pool with open arms. Dave never sought credit. When local news interviewed him, he spoke only about healing after loss and the importance of standing up when something feels wrong. He rebuilt friendships in the neighborhood, hosted barbecues without fear of complaints, and watched sunsets from his patio knowing the peace he came for was finally real. Karen's downfall wasn't about revenge for Dave. It was about restoring what a community should be. Neighbors looking out for each other, not one person ruling through fear. Months later, indictments came down. Fraud, theft, conspiracy, the charges were extensive. The missing funds began flowing back through restitution and insurance claims. New playground equipment appeared where budget lines had sat empty for years. The pool sparkled brighter than ever the summer Miguel brought his new college friends home again. And Dave? He sat quietly in the shade, sipping iced tea, occasionally offering free legal advice to anyone worried about HOA letters. The retired lawyer had found something more valuable than solitude. He'd found purpose and a neighborhood that finally felt like home.